Halloween was a special occasion for me. Marked as the start of winter, Halloween is synonymous with the longer nights and eerie atmosphere. An excuse to dress up in ridiculous costumes, spend hours binge-watching horror movies, and of course, trick-or-treating. Despite all the joyous activities Halloween brings, let me tell you why I no longer celebrate this holiday. It was the night before Halloween. I was on the phone to my childhood friends Tommy and Esther. Tommy, Esther, and I grew up in Trinidad, southern Colorado. We attended the same elementary, middle, and high school and only went our separate ways for college. Tommy never left Colorado. Tommy had the perfect life, a stable, upper-class family with parents that loved him, a big home, and all the happiness money could buy. I, on the other hand, had it a little more rough. I grew up in a trailer home to a single mother and was lucky enough to secure a scholarship in Nebraska. Esther had it the worst. Esther's dad left when her mom was pregnant, and her mom died when Esther was 7. We never knew how Esther's mom passed. I mean, there were rumors, but that's all they were. Rumors. Esther grew up in the system, bouncing from home to home, and later, in college, from state to state. Despite going to different colleges in different states, the three of us maintained a close bond. You see, from elementary school, Tommy, Esther, and I celebrated every Halloween together, whether that was at Tommy's place, at my home, or at the local diner. We were always doing something together. We knew that as we navigate through this next phase of life, naturally, we would drift apart. And so we made a pact that once a year we would get together to celebrate our favorite holiday, and that we did. After spending hours on the call, unable to come to a decision on what we should do for Halloween, Esther suggested that we do something different. Entirely. Esther wanted to go on a spooky adventure, in line with the Halloween aesthetic. I asked Esther what she had in mind, and she replied that she would think about it. Literally, a minute later, Esther sent us a picture of this creepy-looking house, clearly abandoned, that looked to have been occupied by a satanic cult. Forgotten Lodge, Cannon City. Tommy asked Esther where she had found this place. Esther responded, "The dark web." I vehemently rejected her proposal. The dark web, for crying out loud. Halloween was a time to celebrate together, not a time to experiment with our lives. Tommy and I knew that Esther was sometimes peculiar. She liked to dabble in the unknown, and given her past, we understood that she could be quite impulsive. Luckily, Tommy agreed. Esther was annoyed at our reaction, but seemed to come around when we told her that she could still take us on a spooky adventure, but it could not be even remotely tied to the dark web. On the night of Halloween, I dressed up as a lion before meeting up with Esther the witch and Tommy the wardrobe. We must have spent 2, maybe 3 hours at Tommy's. We began our get-together by carving pumpkins, then played charades and finished with dinner. In between it all, we had drinks. Esther couldn't drink, as she was the designated, or should I say volunteered, driver. But Tommy and I, we had a lot of drinks. After dinner, Tommy, Esther, and I set off on our adventure. Esther was behind the wheel, Tommy and I in the back, wasted. Unsurprisingly, Tommy and I passed out not long after hitting the road. We awoke to Esther yelling, "We are here, boys!" Clearly, still intoxicated, Tommy and I fumbled our way out of the car to be with Esther, now standing in the parking lot. From being completely smashed, I was now somewhat tipsy. Despite being a little drunk, I could tell that Esther was acting strange. This was not Esther having sneaked in a drink whilst driving. This was Esther with an intent for something. The fact that we were in the middle of a ghost town with no cell service to confirm our location only added to the unsettling atmosphere. Tommy asked Esther, "Where are we?" "It is my adventure, remember?" Esther replied. She then asked us to hand over our phones. Tommy was still pretty intoxicated and complied. I was hesitant. "No distractions," Esther said forbiddingly, as she snatched the phone from my hand. She proceeded to throw our phones in the glove compartment, locked the car doors, and handed me the keys. Before I could even attempt to open the car door, Esther grabbed our hands and dragged us out of the parking lot. We walked around this vacated community for about 15 minutes. There was no sign of civilization. Not one person roamed the streets, not one car on the road, and not one house with a light on, to suggest it was inhabited. At this point, Tommy and I were completely sober, though we were concerned with Esther's behavior. She seemed like a woman possessed, refusing to speak and forcefully dragging us along like we were her rag dolls. Suddenly, Esther stopped dead in her tracks. She released her vice-like grip from our hands and stared blankly across the road. I could feel a sudden change in the aura around us. It felt ominous. I looked to see what Esther was hypnotized by, and in that moment, my heart skipped a beat. A run-down, desolate house surrounded with dead plants, a cracked door plastered with the words, "Do not enter," and dark windows filled with shadows. The place looked familiar, and as I looked to read the house sign, I couldn't believe what was in front of me. Forgotten Lodge, Cannon City. Tommy and I absolutely lost it. We were overwhelmed with emotions, anger, sadness, disgust, and above all, fear. We started screaming at the top of our lungs, "Esther, why? Why would you bring us here?" Esther snapped back, "I need to do this." Esther then bolted across the road without saying anything else, kicking the door down of the house as she entered. I immediately looked at Tommy and asked, "What now?" Tommy always had the answers, but this time he didn't. And so I told Tommy that because we had no idea what significance Esther had for this place, we should let her do whatever it was that she came out here to do, and we would wait back in the car. Tommy simply nodded along as if I was giving him orders. With the adrenaline coursing through our bodies, Tommy and I ran back to the car. I sat in the driver's seat, Tommy in the passenger seat beside me. I opened the glove compartment and took Esther's phone. I had questions, and I knew that this was the only way I could get answers. After several minutes of digging through her messages, calls, and web history, I couldn't find a thing. Tommy suggested to look through her private tabs, and with a firm swipe to the right, there it all was. Pages and pages of private tabs, all related to the dark web. I clicked on the Forgotten Lodge. I learned that the lodge was, in fact, a sacred place. The house acted as a portal to the realm of the paranormal. People from all over the world would go there to communicate with the dead, manifesting as spirits or, worse, demons. I instantly made the connection. Esther wanted to communicate with her mom. I read how dangerous the place was, and how dangerous the rituals were that took place there. Those lucky enough to return were never the same, and the others were never heard or seen from again. I feared for Esther's life. I told Tommy what I had just discovered and that we needed to go back. 15 minutes later, Tommy and I arrived back at the lodge. Please understand that we were scared shitless. However, the safety of our friend was paramount, and in spite of the crippling fear, we dragged our reluctant legs across the road, straight to the doors of hell. The door had been left ajar. Standing outside the house with my hands clasped to the frame, I poked my head through and screamed, "Esther!" There was no response. I screamed, "Esther!" Again and again. There was no response. I looked at Tommy, and Tommy, at me. We had to go in. I entered the lodge first, and scanned the room looking for Esther. The room was empty, other than the literal dust flying around. The only signs of occupancy were the cobwebs layering the furniture. There were, however, these ancient demonic symbols painted on the walls. The symbols served as a guide, leading you from room to room, and brought Tommy and I to the door to the basement. I pulled the door open, and we made our way down the creaky stairs. We warily set foot in the room, and couldn't believe the state it was in. Knives scattered across the basement floor, old paintings wrecked, chairs that looked to have been thrown against the walls, and ancient scriptures torn to shreds. The scene looked to have been stripped straight out of a horror movie. As I treaded cautiously around the shards shattered from the antique mirror, I noticed the trail of blood leading to 4 still-lit candles circling Esther's belongings. Her ring that was passed on from her mom and was coated in blood clamped down a piece of paper riddled with Esther's bloodied prints.
I am sorry. I am truly sorry for what I have just put the two of you through. I know my actions cannot be forgiven nor forgotten, but I hope that over time you will come to at least understand. It was not an easy decision for me to make. Just the thought of leaving the two of you behind hurt so much. But it was the only option. A few months ago, I met this guy in college, and he introduced me to the dark web. I came across a post on the Forgotten Lodge and how the lodge acted as a portal to communicate with the dead. I just wanted to say goodbye to Mom because that moment had been robbed from me. I followed the steps, and using an Ouija board, I got to speak to her. It was really her. Our conversation didn't last long because the connection through the board was weak. However, it was just enough time for her to tell me about the night she died. How we were at home shielding away from the storm outside, and I was throwing a tantrum. I was throwing a tantrum because I wanted ice cream. My mom just wanted to make me happy, and as she was driving to the grocery store in that horrid weather, a drunk driver crashed into her. She died on the spot. I feel awful and terribly guilty. I mean, if only I hadn't thrown a tantrum. My mom would still be here. She told me that she was scared and alone. I asked how I could help, and she told me to let her in. I asked what she meant, but she just told me to go to the lodge and let her in. The connection dropped, and from that night that's all I hear. Let her in. It feels like a parasite feeding on my soul. Let her in. My thoughts. Let her in. My dreams. Let her in. My mind. Let her in. I just want the voices to stop. Let her in. Let her in. Let her in. Let her in. No. I need to let her in.
Time froze in that moment, and I was lost for words. My throat tightened, and I felt a lump form that impeded my speech. I cried and sobbed until I could cry no more. I could faintly hear Tommy in the background, hysterical, as he called 911 and pleaded for help. We weren't sure what happened. Had Esther been murdered, abducted, did she run away, or worse, taken her own? All we were certain of was that Esther was here, and a bloody, disturbing ritual had taken place. Not long after, 2 officers escorted Tommy and I out. The room was taped off for further investigation, and we were driven back to Trinidad. It was a long and silent ride back. Neither of us uttered a word. The pain never truly goes away. I still think of Esther every single day. They say that time heals all wounds, but they don't reference the scar that is left behind, a scar that can be seen, a scar that can be picked apart, a scar that once it has been opened, feels like your heart has been ripped in half. Months later, I managed to get a hold of Esther's dad. I am not sure why, but I felt that he needed to know about the circumstances surrounding Esther's disappearance. I broke the news to him on the call, and he started crying uncontrollably. He blamed himself, and part of me agreed. He should have never abandoned Esther. He should have been there for her. I told him that I was going to end the call, but he told me to wait. He said there was one thing that he didn't understand. Esther's mom never died in a car crash. Esther's mom died in her sleep from a heart attack, and he asked where Esther heard that. I replied that I didn't know and abruptly ended the call. It has been 3 years since that horrific night, and there is still not a single trace of Esther. To this day, I still wonder who Esther was communicating with. Esther sent out an invitation to the spirit world, but it was not Esther's mom that reached out. Esther, I hope, is still out there somewhere, but she is not alone. Whoever Esther thinks she is with is not who she thinks it is.